Thank you, Paul, for a wonderful summary of a very detailed and thoughtful piece of work. The areas that strike me that are coming through, which seem to be so logical and to make such sense that one almost wonders why we struggle with them so much. The idea of subsidiarity, the idea that decisions are best taken as close to the ground as possible, the idea that simple rules help, and that a team working effectively together is going to be more effective than an individual taking 100% of responsibility. There is a huge amount of logic there, but I think there are also many more questions that are raised by that. How does that fit into a broader organisational perspective? How does that fit into a broader sectoral perspective? And then also, from that organisational side of things, also the very personal. You know, what does it require of the individual to give up to be part of that team? You touched on that very, 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 very briefly there, and I think that's a critical thing as well. What is it that makes teams work? Some teams work straight away, and you suggested it's about intensity. I'd like to understand a bit more about that. But let's hear from Steve and from Chris some of their thoughts and their reflections, not least based on their own personal experience. And so maybe, Steve, just to begin, I mean, the report is very clear in suggesting that humanitarian leadership is a collective team responsibility, not an individual one. I mean, how do you reflect on that?
I think what we try and do is address what's a very complex situation by being very complicated. So if you think right now in the responses to Syria or Gaza or Northern Iraq, just how complex those situations are, and you think of multi-mandated organisations trying to work with many, many different other people, juggling stakeholders at political, global, national level, as well as accountability to individuals. The breadth and scope of what we try and do is beyond any individual's capability. Then if you look at what Paul is saying about the aspects of leadership, you know, trying to do the right thing, trying to do it the right way, and trying to make sure that everybody's getting along at the same time. It's a lot to try and put onto somebody else. And so trying to mitigate the flaws of an individual as skilled as they are, trying to amplify the impact of what they can across a broad spectrum makes a lot of sense. And I think what the report does is tease out some of these aspects and actually puts the responsibility onto organisations to say, you are responsible for creating the environment, for creating just enough support, as well as developing individuals as leaders.
But we all have, or many of our organisations have, leadership programmes, which is something, you know, we feel rather good about, which almost by definition focus on the individual. How do you think we're doing in getting that recognition, as you say, of the fact that one person can't do everything, if we're all focusing on leadership programmes, which...
Yeah. Well, look, I think leadership programs for the individual is important. You need to invest in skills for individuals, and programs that focus on individuals' development are valid. But I think the report's very clear in saying the application of leadership is never in an individual pursuit. It's always a collective pursuit. So the leadership development courses that we're involved in now reflect that, particularly through simulation and those kinds of things, that the application of leadership is done in a collective.